Most people forget the tiny moments that pass between two people, but sometimes those small things echo louder than the big ones. That's what struck Marin the night everything quietly shifted. On a calm winter evening, just past twilight, outside the old library that always smelled like dust, pine, and memories she tried to ignore. She hadn't planned on seeing him again, not after all those years, not after the silence that settled between them like an unanswered question. But there he was, Rowan Hale, broad-shouldered, soft-spoken, and carrying that gentle steadiness she remembered too well, stood under the dim street lamp, brushing snow off the hood of his truck like he had nowhere else to be. His breath fogged in the air. His scarf was wrapped the same way he used to wear it when they were younger, looped once and tucked a little crooked. Marin froze halfway down the library steps. Her heart dropped straight through her chest. She hadn't seen him since they were barely out of high school, when she left without offering a real explanation, chasing a life she wasn't even sure she truly wanted. She always assumed he had forgotten the small details of who she used to be. She always hoped he had. But the way his eyes lifted, as if pulled to her before he even heard her footsteps, made her palms go cold. "Marin?" he asked softly, almost like saying her name pulled up an old ache. She managed a small nod, trying to gather every frayed emotion before it spilled out into the cold air. "Hey, Rowan, it's been a while." He stepped closer, snow crunching under his boots. "What are you doing out here so late?" Marin held up the stack of old poetry books she had tucked under her arm. "Couldn't sleep. Figured a walk might help." Rowan let out a quiet breath. "Still wandering around at odd hours when something's weighing on you." The comment struck deeper than she expected. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the gentle way he said them, like he'd never stopped noticing the small things about her. She forced a smile. "I see your memory hasn't changed." His eyes warmed, but there was something else beneath it, a shadow of questions she had never answered. And then he did something she didn't expect. He reached out and lightly tapped the corner of her book stack. "You're still doing that," he said, "holding your books too tight when you're nervous. You used to leave marks on the covers." Her breath caught. Of all the things he could have remembered, he remembered that? The street lamp hummed overhead. Snow drifted down in slow, lazy flakes. For a moment, it felt like the world had stepped aside and left only the two of them standing there, surrounded by old wounds they never talked about. "You always noticed everything," Marin whispered. Rowan's expression softened, but his voice dropped a shade. "Some things are hard to unsee." She swallowed. "I didn't think you'd remember." "I remembered more than you think." Those words unsettled her, not in a painful way, but in the kind of way that made her chest tight with all the history they never faced. He glanced toward the library door behind her. "You want a ride home? It's colder than it looks." She hesitated. She should have said no. She should have kept her distance, kept her heart quiet. But something tugged at her, the same quiet pull she tried to bury years ago. "Okay," she breathed. They walked toward his truck, silent except for the soft crackle of snow beneath them. Rowan opened the passenger door for her, just like he used to, and that simple gesture, so small, so familiar, sent a wave of old warmth through her. As she climbed in, she caught him studying her again, not in a heavy way, not in a searching way, just noticing. And that made her wonder how much he still carried, and how much she had unknowingly left behind. Because somewhere deep inside, something in Rowan's eyes told her this night was only the beginning, and what he was about to confess, something he had held on to all these years, was the last thing she expected. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like the video and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. The ride started quietly, the heater humming softly as Rowan eased a truck onto the empty road. Snow drifted across the windshield in thin, wandering lines, glowing under the streetlights like falling threads of silver. Marin kept her hands wrapped around her books, her fingers tense against the worn edges. She tried to relax, but every small thing Rowan did, the gentle turn of the wheel, the way he checked the mirrors twice, the familiar habit of tapping his thumb on the steering wheel, tugged old memories to the surface. He hadn't changed as much as she expected, and somehow that made her chest ache more than anything. "You been back long?" Rowan asked quietly. "A few months," she replied. "Didn't plan on staying this long, just needed space." He nodded slowly. "You always tried to hold everything in on your own." She blinked, surprised. "You remember that too?" "I remember more small things than big ones," he said, his voice low. "Always have." His words settled between them like warm air in a cold room, comforting but unsettling in a way she couldn't name. Marin turned her gaze out the window. Houses passed by, their porch lights glowing soft and gold. People settling in, unaware of the fragile conversation unfolding in Rowan's truck. "You look tired," he said gently. "Long week." But the truth was heavier than that. Nights she couldn't sleep, choices she regretted making years ago, and the uneasy feeling that coming home had brought up more than she could handle. Rowan slowed at a stop sign, the red glow reflecting across his features. "You don't have to tell me everything," he said, "but I can tell something's bothering you." "You always could." She let out a slow breath. "It's strange being back. Feels like I'm walking through pieces of my old life." "Is that why you left back then?" he asked, voice careful. "Because things felt too heavy here?" She hesitated. "That was part of it, but not the whole story." "I didn't leave because of the town," she said. "I left because I didn't know who I was, and I didn't want to drag anyone down with my confusion." Rowan's hands tightened lightly on the wheel. "Including me?" Her heart stumbled. The way he said it, soft, steady, but edged with something he'd never let her hear back then, made her throat tighten. "Rowan," she murmured. "It's okay," he said, shaking his head slightly. "I'm not asking to reopen old wounds. I just wondered." Marin looked at him, the soft glow of the dashboard lighting the angle of his jaw, the quiet in his eyes. He wasn't angry. He wasn't trying to make her guilty. He was simply asking the question he'd carried for years. And for the first time, she felt the weight of how her disappearance might have hurt him in ways he never voiced. "Back then, I didn't understand anything clearly," she said softly. "I didn't know what I felt. I didn't know how to stay. Leaving felt easier than facing things I didn't know how to explain." Rowan exhaled slowly. "Thanks for saying that." She nodded, wishing she could offer more. A few minutes passed in quiet, the road narrowing as they approached her street. Her house sat at the corner, small, with worn wooden steps and a porch that creaked with every season. Rowan pulled up to the curb but didn't turn off the engine yet. Warm air filled the truck, though she still felt a slight chill run down her arms. He looked at her with a steadiness that made her pulse shift. "Marin, can I ask you something?" Her breath caught. "What is it?" Rowan hesitated, his fingers pausing mid-tap on the steering wheel. His voice came out low, almost fragile. "Why tonight? Why show up in front of that library at that exact moment? Because when I looked up and saw you standing there, it felt like something I'd been waiting for, without even realizing I was waiting." Her heartbeat slowed, then rushed in her ears. She didn't know how to answer that, mainly because she didn't know the truth herself. But before she could speak, Rowan added in a quieter tone, "And there's something I should have told you a long time ago, something I held on to even after you left." Marin felt the air shift. His voice carried a weight that wasn't there earlier, something deeper, something unfinished. She looked at him, feeling the moment stretch, soft and fragile. "What is it?" she whispered. Rowan swallowed, eyes flicking toward her, full of something she wasn't ready for. "I'll tell you," he said softly, "but only if you really want to hear it." The world outside the truck felt impossibly still. And for the first time in years, Marin wasn't sure she was ready for the truth he'd been holding. For a long moment, Marin didn't speak. Not because she didn't want to hear what Rowan had to say, but because something in his voice, quiet, steady, and weighted with years, made her chest tighten. The heater hummed softly, sending warm air across her hands. Outside, the snow had slowed to a light drift, barely brushing against the windshield. The whole world felt suspended, like time was waiting for her answer. Finally, she nodded. "I want to hear it." Rowan's shoulders rose with a slow breath, as if he needed a moment to study himself. He turned off the engine, and the silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had come before. "I didn't expect to say this tonight," he admitted, "and I know it's late, and maybe it's not the right moment, but I need you to know it." Marin sat still, her pulse beating soft but fast. "When you left," Rowan said, "I tried to pretend it didn't matter. I told myself you had things to figure out, that you were meant for something bigger than this town. I tried not to take it personally." He looked down at his hands. "But I did." Her breath caught quietly. She had suspected it, feared it, but hearing him say it, plain and gentle, hit her harder than she expected. "You didn't owe me anything back then," he continued. "We weren't together. We weren't anything official. But I need you to understand something." He lifted his gaze, and for the first time that night, she saw something raw behind his calmness. "I noticed everything about you. The way you tapped your thumb when you were thinking, the way you reread the same line in a book when you were trying to avoid saying what was really on your mind, the way you smiled more with your eyes than your mouth. I noticed all of that." Marin felt her throat tighten, heat rising behind her eyes. "And I cared about you," Rowan said, voice steady but soft. "A lot more than I ever said out loud." Silence filled the truck like a thick blanket. Warm, close, impossible to ignore. Marin stared at him, trying to process every piece of what he just revealed. She had imagined Rowan moving on, forgetting her easily, letting time smooth out whatever feelings he once carried. She never thought he had held anything this heavy for so long. "Rowan," she whispered, "I didn't know." "I didn't want you to feel guilty," he said. "You needed time. You needed space. I never wanted to be the reason you stayed somewhere you felt trapped." She drew in a slow, shaky breath. "That wasn't why I left." "I know that now," he said quietly. "But back then, I kept wondering what would have happened if I had said something sooner." Marin pressed her fingers to the edges of her books, trying to ground herself. "You don't have to explain all of this, not if it hurts." His smile was soft, almost sad. "It doesn't hurt, not anymore. I didn't expect to see you tonight. And when I did, all those things I kept buried came back like they'd never left." She didn't know what to say, didn't know what she was supposed to feel. All she knew was that the truth in his voice stirred something deep inside her, something she once tried to ignore. The truck felt too quiet, the night too still, her heartbeat too loud. Finally, she whispered, "Rowan, I never meant to leave you with unanswered feelings." He tilted his head slightly. "Did you ever feel anything for me back then?" The question hit her like cold air. Marin swallowed hard. She could lie, she could evade, she could hide behind all the excuses she used years ago. But looking at him now, At the man who had carried all these quiet pieces of her without ever asking for anything in return. She couldn't. "I did," she said softly, "more than I understood at the time." Rowan's expression shifted, surprise, relief, and something warmer flickering through his eyes. "But I was scared," she continued. "Everything felt too big, too fast. I didn't know how to stay without losing myself." He nodded slowly, absorbing every word. Before either of them could speak again, a soft gust of wind rattled the branches outside, and Marin shivered despite the warm air. Rowan noticed immediately. "You're cold," he murmured. "You should go inside." She hesitated, her hand resting on the door handle, but she didn't open it. "Rowan, what do we do now?" she whispered. His answer was quiet, but full of something unspoken. "That depends on what you want." And in that moment, she realized the next step wasn't his to make, it was hers. The question lingered in the air, gentle yet impossibly heavy. What do you want? Marin wasn't sure how to answer, not because she didn't feel anything, but because the feelings had returned so quietly, so suddenly, she didn't know where to place them. They were both familiar and new, like recognizing a tune she hadn't heard in years. Snow drifted past the windows in slow, soft spirals. The street was silent. The night felt too tender to break with the wrong words. She looked at Rowan, studying the man he had become. There was a steady calm in his expression, a strength that hadn't been there when they were younger. He wasn't asking out of impatience or longing. He was giving her space again, just like he always did, waiting without pressure, listening without judgment. And that made her chest ache in the quietest way. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I feel like everything is happening too fast." Rowan nodded, almost relieved by her honesty. "It's okay not to know. I didn't expect to see you," she continued, "and I definitely didn't expect you to say all of that." "I didn't expect it either," he admitted. "But seeing you tonight, everything I didn't say back then came back like it was waiting just under the surface." She looked down at her hands. They were trembling slightly. "Marin," he said gently, "you don't have to decide anything tonight. I don't want you to feel rushed." His patience, his gentle warmth, made it harder to breathe. She let out a soft, shaky laugh. "You're doing it again." Rowan blinked. "Doing what?" "Noticing," she murmured, "every small thing." A faint smile touched his lips. "Some things don't change." She looked out the window again, watching the way the snow glowed under the street lamp. Quiet moments like this used to feel like a comfort once, back when they were teenagers sitting in his old car, talking about dreams they never quite shared with anyone else. "It feels like coming home," she whispered before she could stop herself. Rowan's breath caught. "Is that good or bad?" "I'm not sure yet." He nodded, accepting that without hesitation. That was Rowan, never pushing, never demanding more than she could give. Marin slowly reached for the door handle, but paused. "I'm scared," she admitted, "of starting something, of messing it up again, of hurting you again." "You walking away," Rowan said quietly, "hurt a little, yeah. But hearing the truth tonight, that means more to me than anything that happened back then." She pressed her lips together, trying to steady her heart. Then Rowan spoke again, his voice soft but certain. "Marin, I'm not asking you to promise anything. I'm not asking you to stay, or choose me, or figure everything out tonight. I just want you to know the truth. And I want to know if there's even a small piece of you that wants to try again. Someday." Her eyes burned with emotion she wasn't ready to name. "I don't know what the future looks like," she whispered, "but I do know I don't want to hide from it anymore." Rowan's gaze warmed, hope flickering across his features, but still steady, still gentle. "That's enough," he said softly. A quiet moment stretched between them. Safe, fragile, different from anything they shared before. She slowly opened the truck door, cold air brushing against her face. Rowan watched her carefully, like he didn't want to miss even the smallest expression. She stepped out, clutching her books to her chest. But before she closed the door, she leaned in slightly. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me the truth, for waiting to say it until you were sure I could hear it." Rowan gave a small nod. "Anytime." She hesitated, snow brushing against her coat. "I'll see you soon?" "If you want to," he replied gently. She swallowed, nodding. "I think I do." Her voice trembled just enough for him to notice. Of course he did. His expression softened even more. "Good night, Marin." "Good night, Rowan." She walked toward her porch, her heart thudding unevenly. She could feel his eyes on her, steady, present, warm, but not holding her back. When she reached her door, she turned around instinctively. Rowan was still parked at the curb, watching to make sure she made it inside safely. But what she didn't expect was the look in his eyes, soft, almost vulnerable, like he had something else he wanted to say, but wasn't sure she was ready for it. And she wondered, standing in the glow of her porch light, what truth he held back now, and why he hesitated to speak it. Marin stepped inside her house, but she didn't move far from the door. Her hand stayed on the knob, the cold air still brushing her back as she watched Rowan's truck remain parked at the curb. He hadn't driven off. He hadn't even shifted in his seat. He was waiting. Not for her to come back outside. She knew him too well for that. He was waiting to make sure she felt safe. Waiting to make sure the moment ended gently, not abruptly. It was such a small gesture, so quiet, so unmistakably him. And it softened something in her chest she didn't realize had hardened over the years. She lifted her hand in a small wave. Rowan responded with the slightest nod before finally pulling away from the curb, his headlights weaving down the snowy street. Marin stayed at the window until the last trace of light disappeared. Only then did she release a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She set her books on the coffee table, but her thoughts drifted back to him. His calm voice, the way his eyes softened when he spoke the truth, the steady patience that wrapped around every word he said. She had left all those years ago because she felt too young, too unsure, too lost inside herself. She was afraid of being known too deeply. And tonight, Rowan had made her realize he had known her deeply anyway. She sank onto the sofa, running her hands over her knees as if trying to settle her emotions, but the quiet only made everything louder inside her chest. He still cared. Not in a dramatic way, not in a desperate way, in a quiet, steady, familiar way, like time had passed, but his heart had never learned to forget the small pieces of her. And for the first time in years, she wondered if she had left something behind that she wasn't meant to let go of. The next morning, the town lay under a fresh blanket of snow, soft, untouched, peaceful. Marin had barely slept, replaying the night over and over. She made a cup of tea, wrapped herself in a thick sweater, and tried to focus on anything but Rowan. It didn't work. By mid-afternoon, she found herself walking down Main Street, the snow crunching beneath her boots. She told herself she just needed air. She told herself she wasn't looking for him. But when she reached the bakery window and saw him inside, standing at the counter, brushing snow off his shoulders, her heart gave a quiet, unmistakable jolt. She hesitated, then pushed open the door. The bell chimed softly, and Rowan turned. His surprise was gentle but warm. "Marin," he said, "didn't expect to see you today." She stepped closer, her hands nervously tucked into her coat pockets. "I wasn't planning to be here. I just needed to think. About last night? He asked. She nodded. Rowan's expression softened with quiet understanding. Take your time. Whatever you're feeling, it's okay. She took a slow breath. Can we talk? He gestured toward a small table near the window. They sat across from each other, the soft hum of the bakery surrounding them. Marin traced her fingertip along the edge of the table. I kept thinking about what you said, she began, and how much you noticed, how much you carried without saying anything. I never wanted it to scare you off, Rowan replied, back then or now. It doesn't scare me, she said quietly. What scares me is how much I still feel, and how much I tried to pretend I didn't. Rowan's eyes lifted, meeting hers, not searching, not pressing, just listening. I don't know what the future looks like, Marin continued, and I don't want to make promises I can't keep, but I don't want to run anymore. The smallest breath escaped him, relief, soft and honest. You're not running now. Marin felt her throat tighten. I want to try, she whispered. Not rush, not force anything, just slowly, honestly, if you still want that. Rowan reached across the table, not to hold her hand, but just to place his palm near hers, close enough to feel warm, far enough to let her choose. Slow is fine, he said. Honest is all I've ever wanted. Her fingers trembled. She moved just slightly, letting the tips of her fingers brush his. A quiet connection. Small, but exactly enough. Rowan's smile was soft, the kind that reached his eyes. Marin felt something inside her settle into place, a piece she didn't know she'd been missing. And in that tiny bakery, under warm lights and drifting snow outside the window, she realized something simple and steady. The small things he noticed were exactly the things she needed someone to see. Their new beginning wasn't loud or dramatic. It was soft. It was careful. It was real. And it felt like the first step towards something she had been searching for all along.